why this particular review? So we're going to talk to you today about a review that Ad Esse helped us with regarding our housing management function. And the housing managers are an extremely important part of our business. And from my perspective, looking at them as a team, I could see that they were extremely busy, but I did wonder about busy doing what exactly. And there was a high degree of working with the customers. I also thought, well, how much value are they adding to the customers every time that they talk to them? Is there something that's really beneficial that's coming out of that? As a team, they also complained a bit that they were the backstop for the organisation, that anything that was coming that nobody knew what to do with would end up with them, which is probably true. And I was wondering about how we got to that situation as well. So, indeed, there was also lots of visiting. So somebody, a housing manager, jumped in the car and spent the day wandering around estates knocking on doors. And after I'd been on a couple of those visits, I realised that maybe out of 10 or 12 attempted visits, we were only at a strike rate of maybe only 1 or 2 out of every 10 we were looking at, which is pretty low, I thought. So it's about time we looked at that. And thinking about also the business improvement team, we've gone through a few cycles of reviews. As I said, we'd looked to change our consultants. We started speaking to Ad Esse in January last year, so a year ago now, and they seem to be talking the same language as us. We looked around at some other consultants as well, and we decided to engage them in January in helping us with this particular review.
So what were the outcomes we were seeking from the project? Well, first of all, we wanted to properly understand what it was the housing managers do. What was their key focus? We also, although we had some metrics and measures in place, we wasn't sure whether they were the most appropriate measures to measure the types of things that the housing managers were doing and tell us how well we were performing in that area of our business. We also wanted to increase the value for money that was offered by our housing managers. And in terms of the other two things, rent arrears and antisocial behaviour, which we saw as their core functions, we wanted to make sure that they were maximising the income for the organisation, but also from the customer point of view in terms of antisocial behaviour, were they dealing with things in the most effective and efficient way? We also wanted a more focused and consistent delivery of the services that they provided, which as you'll see later on is quite varied. And we needed to know that what we were providing was customer focused, services that customers actually wanted and needed. The second part of our expectation in terms of outcomes from this project was to our business improvement team, in terms of our in-house skills. We hadn't been on courses, etc. We'd learned as we'd gone from the consultants that we'd brought in originally, as Steve mentioned. So we wanted to enhance our skills to make sure that we were doing things in terms of the right way when looking at improvement, but also for the team, the people that were involved in the project. It was important that they learned as well. So we needed skills transference. And as a result of that, we wanted to know whether the approaches that we'd taken to improvement activity historically had been done in the right way. Were we using the tools correctly? Was our approach properly structured? And as a result of that, how could we improve the way we approached improvement? So what did we find? Well, it was really interesting. That's not last night's dinner. What we found was that, as Steve said at the start, housing managers were everything to everybody. They had a lot on their plate, a lot of work, lots of different pieces of work, lots of loose ends that needed tying up, and a lot of grey areas that needed clarifying. I thought there was someone talking to me for a minute. So also in terms of what we found was there was a lack of clarity in the housing manager role. People weren't clear of what housing managers' real role was, and basically everything that was to do with housing management or to do with people went through to the housing managers. We found that in terms of demand, they were dealing with 45 different types of housing issues, and the demand was based on 48% from external customer demand, 43% from internal, and 9% was self-generated work. We also work in a patch system. If you know Horsham at all, the area is around about 250 square miles. And we also got stock in Hampshire as well. The patches, there were 6 housing managers, each of them had a patch of around about 900 properties. Some of those patches were easier to manage in areas that were easier managed properties than others. So that created a workload imbalance, as some people had less work to do than others. In terms of inconsistency, we looked at policies and procedures that were in place, and there were some policies or some procedures in places for some work, There was some work that didn't have any procedures at all, and there was also some work that people knew was there, but it was just done. So what we needed, that created obviously an inconsistency in the way that people received the service and delivered them. The other thing that happened as a result of that was people developed their own ways of working. So because there's no guidance, you just do what you think is best. Again, leads to the inconsistency. We also found housing managers fielding inquiries for other teams. So again, because it was to do with people, oh, it must be the housing manager that deals with this. So they were directed through the housing manager, which meant that I think it was around about 48% of calls that came through them had to be redirected to other people in the organisation. So that affected first-time call resolution, but also led to customer frustration in that people ended up being passed from pillar to post. And we all realised that as customers, that's one of the things that really winds us up in any form of business. There were high levels of double handling. We spoke about people passing things through, telephone calls through housing managers, but there was also high levels of paperwork and electronic work that went through housing managers as well, that they then needed to pass on to somebody else. There was also some bottlenecking as well, quite a bit of bottlenecking in terms of people receiving information, it going in a pile and waiting until somebody got round to actually doing it. 50% of antisocial behaviour contact was failure demand, in that was where customers contacted us chasing up on progress. We've taken on an antisocial behaviour case, accepted it, people wanted constant communication because people affected by antisocial behaviour don't want to wait for things to be resolved, they want it resolved very quickly. So there was a lot of chasing up from the customers. There was excessive and unnecessary travelling. Steve said earlier on as well that if you imagine the geographical area that we cover, housing managers in some instances were going out to visit tenants, knocking on the doors only to find they're not in, having travelled 30 miles or so there, 30 miles back. So you can imagine the cost implications on the business and how it drained our resources in terms of housing managers could have been better available to do other things. As I said, there was a clear lack of suitable measures in place. And when I say team in name only, what I'm not saying that they weren't a good team and they weren't effective in what they did, but basically this was a group of individuals rather than a team of individuals working to common objectives. When we said about the variation that we found, when we went, was produced from our Go-See activity, you can see there the variation in workload. And what we're saying here is it evidenced that people spent most of their time dealing with telephone calls, responding to emails, responding to phone messages, and just generally checking things. In all, we found that there was a 27% of failure demand, which when removed gave us the potential to do 3 different things. We could either manage another 1,500 additional properties with the same level of resources, i.e. with 6 housing managers. We could reduce our staffing levels by 1.5 housing managers, which in terms of cash would save us around about £53,000 a year. Or we could redirect our resources to where they would be better utilised. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the Welfare Reform Act, which comes into effect this year. That will have a major impact on quite a few of our tenants in terms of understanding, in terms of how they're affected financially. What we wanted to do was use the spare capacity created to address the issues that welfare reform will bring, so that we could give more support, advice and guidance to our residents. So they were the findings, but what did we do about it? How did we, once we got all these issues that have come out, what were we going to do? Well, the first thing we did was went back to basics. What we wanted to do was, what is the actual core function of the housing managers? We needed to understand that before we went any further. We did something very radical next that made a few people feel very uncomfortable, because if you're in housing, patches are something that traditionally housing managers, housing officers, the people that are dealing with the tenants tend to have their patch, it's theirs. They understand it, they get to know the people get to understand them, they know the issues, and basically sometimes it can create silo working because they become focused on their own patch, if you like, their own piece. We took those away. We planned the visits better, so rather than people just going out and hoping that people were in, there was a better way of scheduling the visits, which I'll explain later on. We reallocated non-housing management tasks to other people in the business that were more appropriately placed to deal with them, and probably better able to deal with them as well. So in terms of first-time resolution. We looked at our policies and procedures and service standards, and we also, as well as looking at them, we also introduced new ones. We introduced standardised ways of working. For instance, housing managers spent a lot of time writing letters to people, all about the same things, or they tended to be. So what we wanted to do was produce standard templates that put some standard work to it, but allowed as well for the individualism of the housing manager to be contained in that over different issues. And then just as important than any of those, it was the introduction of an information centre, a master schedule and daily meetings. So what was the impact? This is the only time I'm going to have to go to my cards, because there was a big impact. In terms of better workload distribution and management, we achieved better prioritisation and allocation of our work. It's a fairer system now in terms of how work's allocated to housing managers. There's a focus on what matters most to customers, because obviously we needed customer input to focus on what matters most. It's increased housing manager knowledge of our customer base across the whole organisation, rather than just in the areas that they were responsible for initially. And it's made it a more flexible and responsive service. In terms of reviewing the processes and achieving better customer service, we've removed the bottlenecks and waste, which has led to better workflow in the systems and processes that we work to. We've introduced process maps, which makes it clearer for staff and customers to understand the end-to-end process of the systems we work to. It's resulted in a more consistent approach to service delivery, and also, more than anything, less performance gaps in that now customers have access to 6 housing managers rather than 1. When people had patch management, if that person was away for whatever reason, then there was a chance that some of the work that they had, some of the important priorities, were missed out on, again leading to customer frustration. So we filled the performance gaps. Sorry, oops. I'll go back that way, that's it. In terms of reducing the rent arrears, what did we do there? Well, we expect to realise, as I said earlier, in the region of £100,000 per annum from this project if we sustain our approach to dealing with rent arrears. From that, how have we changed? Well, first of all, we've taken a more preventative approach to our work. Earlier intervention and earlier recognition of rent arrears. So rather than letting them happen, that's sort of a failure if you like. What we've got to do is stop them from happening at all, as much as we can. We've adopted a better approach, a more effective approach to helping tenants manage and clear their debts. So again, not letting things mount up, giving people more advice. And then more than anything, there's a collective team responsibility now for arrears reduction, rather than just this, well, that's my patch, I'm focused on minimising the arrears in the area that I'm responsible for. In terms of antisocial behaviour, well, we're clearer now about what we can and can't do in relation to addressing this antisocial behaviour. That means that we can better manage staff, customer expectations and better manage our caseloads. We've got tighter and better focused action plans for investigating and resolving complaints. So at the start, we agree an action plan with the customer. This is how we're going to approach it, and also having that clear plan helps reduce the amount of failure demand in terms of the chasing of calls. We've got earlier agency referrals. As I said, we can only help resolve antisocial behaviour. We can't do it all on our own most of the time. So it's about us being clear with the customer when we can and can't do it, but also referring them to agencies or involving different agencies as and when we need to. There's quicker resolution and closure, although as yet we aren't able to evidence that in terms of performance statistics, but what we do know is that from the visual management system that we've got is that cases don't stay on there as long as they used to. Housing managers also share ideas now for resolution, whereas before they didn't get together as much. The information centre and daily meetings that we've introduced has really helped with resolution sharing. And more so than anything, again, any housing manager can deal with any case, which again fills any performance gaps that were there before. In terms of the savings, the £53,000 per year can be realised, but it's only realised on the bottom line if we lose staff. We don't want to do that, so what we want to do is make sure that that saving is better utilised elsewhere in the business. And when I said about increasing team understanding of improvement and concept of tools available, I think now more than anything, the housing management team understand the importance of continuous improvement, and they understand now what tools are available to them to help them improve without having to involve us, if you like. They can get on with things. From a learning perspective, we first of all, the importance of understanding purpose and having the right measures in place. Going back to purpose really helped us focus on what mattered in this project. If we hadn't have done that, we couldn't have gone through the project as we did. In terms of tools for obtaining the current state data and to help us understand demand and variation, we use things like activity monitoring sheets, day in the life of reviews, where we sat down with individual members of staff to understand what their work was, and also understanding in terms of who the suppliers were, what the inputs were, what the purpose was, the outputs, and who the customers are. So SIPOP was really important as well to understand where we were going. In terms of mapping, process value stream and redesign mapping, well, that helped us understand where our waste was, and also more importantly, our value, but also how the processes flowed, especially in the redesign. How can we turn that to something that's got bottlenecks and all of these issues in it to something that's quite simple, flows and delivers the end result to the customer as and when they want it to. Flash reports, this was really, really effective. When Rebecca first showed me a flash report, it was like, wow, this is really helpful. At the end of every session that we held, it was just one page of A4, very clear. This is what we've done, this is what we need to do, this is what the key issues are, and this is who's responsible for it and when by. Really, really helpful in terms of making the project flow. Towards the end of the project, we did a work area 5S, which really emphasised to all of the people involved how tidiness and organisation in the workplace resulted in better efficiency in service delivery. In terms of the benefits capture sheet, well, that helps us to understand the type and cost of the waste activity pre-improvement, but also then in terms of what the expected outcomes would be when we change things, when we make things better. I said about the use of information centres, master schedules and daily meetings. I can't emphasise how important these are to the success of any project like this. They've improved our visual management and communication, as well as improving, whilst doing that, people's accountability. There's better awareness and distribution of workloads and priorities. It assists with better planning. For instance, the visits now, when people can see what visits are there, it's a case of, well, I'll take those, and it makes sense now people are taking chunks of visits when they need to happen and dealing with them rather than individually. It encourages a team approach to problem solving, as I mentioned earlier on. We're better able to monitor not just individual performance, but whole team performance now, based on the new measures we've introduced. And there's more focus on the things that matter most to our customers. Right, to sum up, from my point of view, at the end of any project, I think it's always good to go back to the people that you've worked with in that project and say, how was it for you? And also say to the customers, when we, once this is bedded in a bit more, how is this for you now? Sometime down the line. This is the feedback that I've got from the team members that were involved. A lot of people felt that they've been empowered more so than any time before to focus on what really matters in terms of their job. To be able to step back and say, what is it we're really all here for? Dissecting processes made people aware of waste and value work. Important now, because now we know what waste looks like. If we're dealing with waste, we can challenge it better. Taboos have changed, encourage us to challenge, so people are becoming now more inquisitive and more willing to say, actually, there's a better way. The morning meetings have achieved where I said before about people working as individuals. There is a team ethos now. People work together as a team, and every morning, without fail, those meetings take place at 9:15. And it's good to stand there and watch and hear people exchanging ideas and problem solving around an information centre. And then finally, it's starting to embed itself in our culture because it's starting to work in that team. You've got to start somewhere. It started there. So, in conclusion, from my perspective, what have we achieved? Well, we've sorted our spaghetti. We've straightened things out, things in more order, we better understand our business. Steve's got the final conclusions.
Yeah, from my perspective, the review has definitely had a positive impact on the housing management function. We've got better procedures now, we've got better measurements in place, and we're performing better against those measurements. As Jim said, there's definitely better teamwork that goes on, and better communication, not just within the team, but with the rest of the organisation as well. It's had a positive impact on our improvement process. We've been able to think about what it was we were offering to the rest of the business as a team. We've improved on what we do, how we do it, the tools that we use, and for me at least, in being able to justify what I do to my chief executive and the board, we're now better able to evidence the impact that we as a business improvement team have. And finally, it's had a positive impact on our people. So I think everybody involved in the process has learnt from this. There's a distinct feeling of more confidence within the team to be able to challenge things when they can see that things aren't quite right, and to come up indeed with solutions themselves sometimes as well, which is incredibly rewarding to see that. There's been lots of learning together, which again has been good for the team. We've had an awful lot of fun. I think that what Rebecca offered us was very professional and delivered on the brief, I think. So all that's very positive. It wasn't without a lot of hard work, and there was some rocky moments along the way as well. But overall, it was all very good.